Der nächste Referent, der Herr Winter,
The next speaker, or the speaker after the next, Mr. Winter, he's caught in traffic. He's traveling by rail, and apparently there's a bit of a problem. The gentleman in charge of transport here tried to go pick him up because he's in a wheelchair, so we hope it'll all work out. We'll see how it goes. But I've got somebody here now who will introduce himself and announce the next speaker.
Ja, herzlich willkommen. Mein Name ist Jannis.
Welcome, I'm Jannis, 22 years old, and I have charge. And the next speaker will speak about behavioral management in the classroom for students with charge, and that'll be Dr. Gail Deuce.
Thank you. Well, hi everybody. Sunday morning. I expect you're all a little bit, but Germany won last night. So I think the German families are all very happy. So I went back to the hotel and I knew you'd won because I suddenly heard this cheer, whoop, 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 go up. So I knew that Germany had won. When Claudia sends out an email and says to us all, what would you like to talk about at the next conference? And it's interesting, isn't it, how without discussing it with each other, the speakers come up with, oh, we'd all like to talk about behaviour. So it ends up being a theme almost of the conference. So I'm hoping that what I say this morning sort of builds on everything that you've heard from David and Tim and Shanti so far. I presented this to the professionals, and it is very much about what goes on in the classroom. But I think as parents, you're the advocates for your children in school and trying to get things happening. So maybe you can share this with your children's teachers. But also, I think there are things that you can use at home as well. So hopefully it'll be helpful for you. I just want to say a huge thank you to Claudia, because I'm not sure if you guys realise that we all send our presentations in English, and Claudia works really, really hard on them. And we have a shared Dropbox, and all I kept singing was, Claudia's updated, Claudia's updated, Claudia. And Claudia has worked so hard on this, and some of the information that we shared through is not easy to translate. I'm sure some of my handouts. So Claudia has done a fantastic job, and I thank you for that, because she sends it back. That's really good. Okay, so some of these bits I'll be able to skip over because you'll already have had some of the information from the others, and some bits we'll spend a bit longer on. So Tim and others in the paper that they wrote recently about behaviour said, challenging behaviour in charge is not inevitable in individuals with charge syndrome, but is highly predictable. So I don't think we should assume that everybody with charge will have challenging behaviour. But I think what the issue is more is to do with how we perceive their behaviours a lot of the time. So Tim came up with this charge behavioural phenotype. So they're characteristics of behaviours that you might see in people with charge. Not necessarily challenging behaviours in their own right, but the way we perceive them sometimes makes them challenging. So, for example, those OCD-type behaviours that Nancy spoke about at the Professionals' Day really well, and I know the others spoke about them a bit. Sometimes they become challenging to us because we're not prepared to acknowledge them and to accept them and to go with them. And so we make them challenging. It's us that make them challenging rather than the young people and the children themselves. So I was thinking about this, and I was reading about a German biologist, and I had to speak to the interpreters to how to pronounce his name because it was a bit unfamiliar to me. Jakob von Uexküll. So apparently it's a very unusual German name. But he was a German biologist, and he looked at relationships with environments. And he was also the guy that pioneered guide dog training, so which was why I was reading about him. And he had this notion of Umwelt, which he called a meaning world. Okay, and the thing is, it's about how every individual person perceives themselves in their world. So it's really subjective, and it's really dependent on our concept development. And our concepts are the meaning that we gain from the world around us. And we develop those concepts through our direct experiences. And because everybody has very different experiences, then everybody has their own meaning world. So each one of you in here and me, we all have our own individual meaning world. And I started thinking about this and thinking, wow, this is really, really good, because this sums up what I've been trying to say for years, in that when professionals and other people are working with children and young people with charge, we put our own perceptions on that young person or that child. So I place my meaning world on them, I impose it on them. And it's going to be different. If you have charge, you're going to perceive the world differently because of the sensory impairments. So what's meaningful to a child or a young person with charge in a situation is going to be different to what's meaningful to me. Yeah, but it's also going to be different to each one of them because they're individuals. And what von Uexküll said was, we have to stretch our understanding to accommodate the understanding of others. And this is something that I have been spending a lot of time with professionals when I go into schools and home settings where their families are supported, to say it's really important that you try and see things from the child or the young person's point of view. And I think when we fail to do that, we create challenges. We make the world more challenging for them because we're not prepared to see things from their point of view. So that's one of the things that I think is a real challenge for people, is to be prepared to look at things differently. So if I see a behaviour, one of these sensory behaviours and these things that some of these children and young people engage in, I'm almost trying to say to myself, well, what is it giving them? Why is it important to them? And I know some of the families in consultations, we've talked about behaviours and reference points and security things, behaviours and objects that are really important to these children and young people. And it's really important that we respect that and we acknowledge it and that we see things from their point of view. So bearing that in mind, a model of behaviour management that we use in the UK is this one. I'll read it out to you because it's in English. Okay, so the bottom layer is creating a positive learning environment. Then the next layer is management of managing behaviour with classroom strategies. And then the third layer is troubleshooting, dealing with confrontation. So if we have a child or young person in school who has behavioural difficulties, this is the model we're supposed to adopt. So the main focus should be on creating a positive learning environment. Unfortunately, a lot of places that I go to, I see that this triangle has been inverted. So the main focus is dealing with the tricky behaviours when they occur. Okay, so that's the main focus. It's not on how can we keep the child or the young person in a better place so they're less likely to reach a point where these behaviours occur. It's not always possible, so we have to have a behaviour plan in place for those occasions where it will happen. But we need to change the focus and focus more on creating a positive learning environment. So this is another diagram that I use when I'm training people and teachers and other professionals, and we're looking at managing behaviour. Okay, so this is like the cycle that you see if there is a behavioural outburst. So number one is the child or the young person is in a calm state. They're well regulated, and when they're in that state, they're then free to be engaged in active learning and other activities. And I'm sure you've seen that when your child and young person is in an agitated state, which is further up, you can't reason with them so readily. And they get so absorbed in it that they then can't do other things. So it's really important, this calm state. And so the next state would be something that triggers an outburst, and then you get the agitation. Sometimes, if we're really quick and if we know what those signals are and we can read the child really well, we can bring them back down again. But at other times, it accelerates, and then you hit that peak where you have the main outburst of behaviour. Then you get the de-acceleration afterwards, when they're probably exhausted, we're probably exhausted from trying to manage it, and then the recovery that happens afterwards. And again, as I say, a lot of the focus is often at number 5, at the peak. And so what I work with schools and with families is about, well, let's see how we can keep the child at number 1 more readily and more often. Let's focus on that. That's creating that positive environment, and let's try and help them stay in that phase more often. Sorry, I have to get to my notes because of it's German in front of me, and it's a bit tricky. So I know pain has already been talked about, but I make no apologies for talking about pain again, because it is the most under-recognised thing, particularly in schools. So I can't remember who it was. Somebody talked about the non-vocal pain threshold, the charge non-vocal pain assessment. And that's a really helpful tool for children and young people who aren't readily able to express themselves. And I'm telling you this now because I think it's an example of why it's so important to consider pain. So a young lady I've worked with since she was tiny, who's now 21, which actually makes me feel really old, but she has some really tricky behaviours, and life just being her every day is really challenging for her. But over time, we've used that assessment, and we've worked out where she is. When we know she's on a good day and things are going really, really well for her, then we said, okay, let's do the assessment now. So we get a baseline, something to use as a reference point. And then her parents have now got to the point, they're a great family. And I so wish that they would come over here. I keep trying to encourage them because I think it would be a great place for them to come. And maybe we need to get links going with the charge group in UK more. So we did that. And then one day the parents phoned me and said, oh, her behaviour's changed. You're saying we need to look at pain. What do we do? What do we do? So they went through the assessment together, and yep, she scored much higher. So I said, well, you really need to take her to the doctor and get her checked. And the usual thing with her is ear infections. So they went to the doctor, checked, no ear infections. And the parents rang me from the doctor's surgery and said, her ears are fine. I said, but there's got to be something, because this young lady is telling us she's not able to express it in any other way. So through her behaviour, she's telling us that something is not right. And so they went back into the doctor again and said, no, we can't leave the surgery. Something's wrong. We've got to get this sorted out. And various other checks were done and everything else. And what happened was they've discovered that 2 of her teeth, she had to have them extracted, and 1 of her teeth had 7 cavities in it. So she must have been in so much pain from that. Yeah. And what the school was focusing on was her tricky behaviour. But you have to look at what's causing it. And pain is one of those things that is so often the issue. Sensory and physical difficulties. I really don't feel I need to say any more about that because David and Tim and Shanti have covered that so well already. But, if they're not in a sensory, well-regulated state, then it's going to be more difficult for them to engage with the world around them and to cope with demands that we make of them, okay? Increased levels of stress and anxiety and fatigue. We know that this is an issue that people with charge live in a heightened state of stress and anxiety and fatigue. It's something that the research that I did for my PhD about learning with charge, that teachers brought up time and time again as being a big issue for them. And so we need to recognise that, and we need to do what we can to reduce levels of stress and anxiety as far as we can. Difficulties with self-regulation we've talked about, and that's about cognitive self-regulation, emotional self-regulation, physiological self-regulation. So some of the children have problems maintaining their internal body temperature. One of the young adults spoke about that quite clearly in her presentation yesterday, which I thought was interesting, about the fact she doesn't know how many clothes to put on and that sort of thing. And also their behavioural state. And I'm sure you've all had it, that when they're in that meltdown phase, it's impossible to get through to them and to reason with them, okay? And it's so hard for them to actually regulate that behaviour and bring themselves back down and calm themselves down. So those are some of the difficulties that they might have. Other difficulties, previous experiences. I don't think, particularly in schools, that people pay enough attention to what the past experiences are of these children and young people. So many of them have had a really difficult start to life. Lots of medical interventions, lots of hospitalizations. So it's disrupted their early childhood. Lots of pain experiences, lots of needles being stuck into them. But it's not just that. The previous experiences may be that they've tried an activity before and they've experienced failure. And that's something in school that I see a lot, is that we set these children up to fail. Okay, they don't focus on what the child can do and then build on that. They set these weird and wacky targets, learning targets, that are really not realistic. So if your past experience has been a failure, if someone then challenges you with that experience again, they're not going to go, yeah, great, I'll have a go at that. They're going to back off, and sometimes it results in what we perceive to be challenging behaviour. Poor communication skills. If you have no other way of communicating that something isn't right for you and that you're struggling to cope with something, you're going to use your behaviour to communicate that. Yeah, and so Tim is always saying all behaviour is communication. So I'm always going into school saying, so what's this behaviour telling us? And sometimes it will be, well, he's telling me that he doesn't like this activity. Okay, so why do you make him do it every morning? Surely there must be other ways of developing these skills that we're trying to develop without making him do something every morning that you know he doesn't like, and there you therefore know he's going to kick against it. Well, I think I would if I had to do something every day that I really didn't want to do and I really didn't like. But how else do they communicate that? And then the environmental factors. And I know that's something that David's talking about, the environmental factors. So just in summary, when we're planning a response to any behavioural difficulties, we're looking at internal factors. So we're looking at things inside the young child or the person that might make things more difficult for them. So if they are very sensitive to sound, then it's going to be sudden sounds in the environment. So you've got the fact that within that child or young person, you've got the fact that they're sensitive to sound. So therefore, you have to look at the environmental factors around that child that are going to make it difficult for them. So sudden loud bursts of sound are likely to be more difficult for them. And when we're looking at external factors, we're looking at the physical environment, but very importantly, we're looking at the social environment. We're looking at the people in it. Okay, and I see adults working with these children and young people who push, 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 niggle, niggle, niggle. And then, is that a very English word? Sorry. But, and then they wonder why the child then finds it difficult. Or you may have, I have a young man I work with, he had a new intervener at the start of the year. That relationship just did not work. So I went to the head teacher and I said, look, it's nothing against that intervener. That intervener is really good, but it's not working between the two of them. There is not a positive relationship. They don't like being in each other's company. We can't make them go through this for a year. And the head was great and said, okay, we'll change the staffing around. Got a different intervener, swapped interveners with 2 children, and it worked really well. So those social factors are really important, the people around them, the other peers around them. And also thinking about the communication environment. And I'm always saying to people, do you speak the same language as that child? Okay, so I may be in a school. We have something that we use in education called a communication hierarchy, which sounds very posh, but really isn't. It just talks about different levels of how children communicate, and it starts at the very earliest level of pre-intentional reflexive behaviour that you get with very young babies. So they cry, not because they're communicating to you that their nappy needs changing, but that's what it means, yeah? And we assume that that carries communication right up to the very highest level where they use abstract communication, so spoken word or sign language to express themselves freely. So they go through all these stages. And I was in a school recently where one little one I was working with is very much at what we call a concrete level, so needs real objects and real actions and movements to understand what's going on. So this is the level that he was at. So they were using tactile signing with him. I said, but there's a real mismatch here. You're not speaking the same language. You need to sort the same language as this child. So we need to be looking at the communication skills. So looking at managing behaviour. Okay, first of all, it's about teaching strategies to indicate and communicate pain issues and related emotions. So maybe it's Tim. You know, when you've heard the presentation so many times, I can't remember who said what. But somebody has said this weekend that there's a real issue around indicating and communicating pain issues and related emotions for them, that they will find this difficult. So I've been working with children and young people now, thinking about how can we get them to express pain more readily. Okay, so a lot of body awareness work, so the teacher doing the head, shoulders, knees and toes, all those sorts of things. But for one youngster that I work with who doesn't have independent movement, we used a brushing technique. Do you know that one that you use? It's a plastic brush that's used on the body firmly to help stimulate the proprioceptive sense, and it raises awareness of the body parts. And we'd been using this with one young man, and he really enjoyed it, but he got to the point where he was getting a bit bored with it. I don't really want to do this anymore. So we had to look at another way of giving him that proprioceptive input. But I said, but this is a really good thing because he really understands what this brush is for. So what we started doing was, if he banged his knee, we would use the brush as a rubbing it over the knee, as a it's making it better. Okay, you do it with children, you rub something when they hurt themselves, rub it better. Okay, and if he saw any of his peers that were hurt, if somebody fell down and banged their head, we'd get him to, we'd use the brush on his head. So it was that this makes it better. And then there was a day when he didn't come into school, and we rang his parents and said, is he okay? And I said, no, he's not well, but he wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. And his mum gave him the brush, and he brushed it on his head, on his face. And Mum took him to the doctor, and he had sinusitis. Okay, so that's a young man who really struggles to express himself, but we were able to teach him to use that brush to brush over the part of his body that's hurting. Okay, so there were two aspects there. One was we had to do body awareness work, so he's aware of his body and aware of where he's hurting, that he could actually locate it on his body. But the other was that he then learnt to use this brush as a make it better, as an indicator to his parents for where it's hurting. But where we have children who are able to cope with what we call abstract things, so drawing a picture is an abstract, anything that's a representation of something that's real is abstract. And we did a lot of this work, and one young man, we took a photograph of him in his swimming trunks, not completely naked, and cut the picture up and made a jigsaw of it, and so he'd been putting all his body parts together. And then we moved from that onto this picture on the right of the little boy with his clothes on. And we were using that, and again, if he hurt himself or if other children hurt themselves, we were pointing to the body parts on here and going, oh, hurts, all hurts. And then again, one morning, he didn't come to school, wouldn't get out of bed, and he signed hurt to his mum. She went and got the iPad with this diagram on it, and he pointed to his stomach. I thought, oh, okay, so took him along, and it transpires that this young man has abdominal migraines. Okay, so again, it's a way that he's able to express himself. So it's about knowing the child or the young person, the level of communication that they're at, and how we can work with them. And if they can't express it in any way that they can make themselves understood, you use the non-vocal pain assessment. Identifying potential sources of anxiety and stress and work to minimize them, okay? That's a really important one, that we recognize where we're putting them under pressure. Yeah. So a little lad I work with, a very able little lad in a mainstream setting, hour and a half, hour and 3/4 taxi journey every day into school. It's a long time to sit still when you're someone that needs to move, and he needs to move. Okay, so gets in school, has to go, sits on carpet time for registration with all his friends, so he sits on that. And then because they knew he liked phonics, they put him on a table with some other children doing a phonics task. And this little chap said, I need a relax. Oh, that's interesting. And the adult working with him, no, come on, 5 more minutes, we're nearly there, 5 minutes, just keep going. So then he did a little bit more, and then went, I need a lie down. No, come on, 3 minutes, nearly there, nearly finished. Table went flying, everything went flying. And the teacher said, see, this is what I have to deal with. And I said, but I have never heard a child so politely say, I'm losing it. I can't do it anymore. And they didn't respond to that. So his levels of stress and anxiety were going up and up and up. And he really, really clearly expressed that he wasn't managing it. And no, we've got to keep through. So they pushed and pushed and pushed. And then he went. And of course, who had the challenging behavior in that situation? It was the adult, not the child. But the problem was placed on the child. And it was definitely the adult that had pushed him to that point. Yeah, so it's about recognizing when we're putting these increased pressures on these children and actually making sure that we don't, and having different actions. Teaching strategies to help manage stress and anxiety. They need to learn how to be able to manage themselves. Sometimes you have to tell them that you can see that anxiety and that stress is building up, but ways of how to manage it. So whether they leave the situation, whether they talk to an adult, or whether you do something like yoga. So a young lady I work with, she's a great young lady, and she's been my best teacher so far, I think. She tells me so many things, and that's the great thing. When you work with a whole range of people with charge, the really able ones can tell me things that I can then it helps me understand better the children and young people that can't tell me. And she's just an absolute joy. She finds things tricky, and I am so proud of her because at, how old is she now? 22, she's just done her bookkeeping exams and passed them. I had a text while I was here to say that she's passed them, so I am so, so delighted. But she's a young lady who gets very stressed and very anxious and very wound up. And then if you don't diffuse it, you get really bad language, and it's often directed at people. And so you can now just say to her, Jenny, what do you need to do? And she'll go, belly breathe. Put her hands on her stomach and do the deep breathing that you do with yoga, because deep breathing is calming. And lots of our children with charge and young people, they really shallow breathe. They don't use their lungs fully. They often have a quick rate of breathing. And if you can help them to calm that down and to increase their breathing through deep breathing, such as in yoga, it really, really helps them. Accept they're going to need high levels of sensory input and really address the sensory issues. That's a primary thing, is let's look at the sensory issues that are going for them and let's address them. So I've got a youngster, actually I've got 2 young people now, who really struggle to sit still, who are in mainstream schools and really struggle to sit. And they're much better if they can stand. So they're at standing desks in the classroom. So, and one of them, I was watching him the other day, an hour and 15 minutes, I think the lesson was, and the whole time he was just going like this. And it was fine. He was at a standing desk, he was engaged, he was focused because he could move. And children that don't have independent movement, I'm always saying, get them out of their chairs, do stretches, do coactive movement work with them. Because if you don't stimulate their proprioceptive and vestibular senses, they lose that connection with their bodies. And I think that must be one of the worst things. You know, well, maybe you don't do it, but when in bed at night and you're just going off to sleep and sometimes you get that, feeling this sensation that you're falling out of bed. And they say that that's what it can be like for these youngsters when they've got the vestibular difficulties. And it's really unnerving. So if you can get them moving and keep them moving and addressing all their sensory issues, then it helps them to remain well regulated and in that calm state. I've put acknowledge and respect their self-stimulatory behaviours and OCD-type behaviours because we don't respect them. And they're really important. And I know David often says about these self-stimulatory behaviours are perceived as a really negative thing. And I think they're a really positive thing because the youngster has worked out for themselves, if I do this, it helps me to remain well regulated. Well, what a great thing that they've worked out. Okay, sometimes you just have to go with it and say, yeah. And as Tim has been saying, is this behaviour a problem? If it's a problem, you need to do something about it. I never, ever take a behaviour away and stop a child doing a behaviour until we've sorted out something more positive that we can put in its place. Because that behaviour is there for a really important reason. It's really important for the child. And I can promise you, if you just make them stop doing that, they'll find another way of getting that input that they need. And that might not be as positive. So a youngster that was rocking that I was working with, and backwards and forwards movement is really calming. Sideways movement is arousing. So that tells you something about the way that they're moving. If they're moving side to side, they need to arouse their state. If they're going backwards and forwards, they're trying to calm themselves. So this young man was rocking backwards and forwards. The staff stopped him rocking, and so he went to headbanging. Okay? So you have to make sure that you respect what they're doing. And if it's okay, leave it. Yeah, but otherwise find another way of giving them what they need. Self-regulation strategies is a big one. We talk about that a lot. And it's about how you keep them in that well-regulated state. And I think that surrounds everything that everybody's been talking about, is really focused on helping them to regulate themselves better. Identify their learning characteristics. I presented on this a couple of years ago. That was my PhD thesis, was how children with charge learn. And if they have these learning characteristics, then the teachers need to acknowledge them and put strategies in place to support them. So, for example, they're really dependent on routine and structure. And I always think these weekends must be so hard for them because all that routine and structure that you have at home goes out of the window. So it makes it quite a tricky weekend for them, and they cope with it so well. But in schools, maintain routine and structure. Establish routine and structure and keep it in place wherever possible. And if you can keep those routines in place, you reduce their stress and anxiety so that when changes do happen, and life happens, changes happen, they've got more reserves to help them cope with those changes. And supporting communication development. This was just another example of a pain thing that we've used with the youngsters that I've worked with. And Claudia she's amazing. She's put it into German for you guys. Okay, so we use it with a couple of children to say where they are on the chart as to how much something is hurting. Capacity building model. Julie talked about this 2 years ago at the conference here. And what I like best about this is that it puts the issues and the problems on the adults and not on the child. So the opposite of this is a deficit model. So the child can't do this, the child can't do that. Yeah, they focus on the child and the problems are placed on the child. And that really should never, ever be the case. We should be looking at the positives, and a capacity building model is looking at their learning potential and their ability to succeed in school. Okay, and if we do it from that way, the issues, how are we going to help them reach their learning potential? How are we going to help them to positively engage in active learning? Those issues become mine and not the child's. Yeah? So that's the way that we should be looking at them. Routine and structure we've talked about. Being prepared to share ownership of learning. This is something that a lot of teachers find really, really difficult. It's really funny because I sometimes think these teachers are learning from the children with charge, because Martha Majors at Perkins says children with charge need to be in charge. Okay? And I've spoken to so many parents whose child wants to be in control of their parents. Yeah? And they're saying, no, you have to do it this way. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. And that's such a charge thing. But it's such a teacher thing too. Yeah? Teachers want to be in charge. And sharing that ownership of learning is really challenging for some teachers. But I'm always saying, if you can give the child or young person some say, some control over what's happening, so letting them make choices. Okay, you've got to do two things. What do you want to do first? What do you want to do second? Or, I need us to do this. So you choose one thing. Okay, we'll do my thing first and we'll do your thing next. Yeah, sharing that control and negotiating. I sometimes think I could work for United Nations, the amount of negotiation I end up doing with some of these children and young people. But it is an important thing to do. Tim also says, no, it's not always possible to redirect the child's goals. And some of those OCD-type behaviours, sometimes you just have to go with them. Yeah, so I have a young man who every time I see him, asks me what colour my car is. Red. Okay. Where do you live? Cambridge. Okay. Have many smoke detectors do you have? 3. Okay, we go through that, and then we can talk about other things. Oh, you're nodding. Have you got children who like smoke detectors? And ask you, say, yeah. But if I don't answer those, he keeps doing it again and again and again. Okay? But if I address it once, he now knows. And I have this thing with you, I will tell you once, and I'm not telling you anymore, once only, so listen up. Okay? So we go through this little thing, and then we're on to the next thing. Okay, so I'm happy to go with him. It's fine. It's not a problem. Sometimes they have to go and get something or check something. I'll tell you a funny thing. I had a dream last night. Really weird. I don't know what I ate yesterday, but whoa. And I dreamed that flying back to England tonight, I had to go via Russia. My ticket said I had to go via Russia. I actually got out of bed and checked my ticket. I know, phew, I can fly directly back to England. That's really odd, isn't it? But that thought was in my head, and I knew that until I checked my ticket, I would not be able to go back to sleep again. Weird. But I think that's what it must be like. Yeah, they've got this thought, and they've got to just do this thing. And until they've done this thing, they're not free to do the next thing. Okay, so sometimes we have to be willing to go with them. Be flexible. Okay, I'm always saying this, when things are good, when things are going really well, then yeah, push them, challenge them, I do. But when they're having a difficult day, why would you push them over the edge? But that's what happens a lot in schools. Okay, no, it's timetabled. We have to do this, you have to do this. And they would say to me, he's having a difficult day today, and then wallop straight into something, and then they wonder why they don't cope. Okay? And I talked day before yesterday. See, all the days are merging together. But it's lovely, it's fine. A young adult that I've been working with who's in a residential setting, he's 24 now, and his staff know him really, really well. He's had the same interveners for 8 years, which is fantastic. And they say, we know when he's having a difficult day, we know from the time he gets out of bed whether he's going to have a good day or a difficult day. And I said, okay, so what do you do on the difficult days? Well, we have to make him go over to college. And I said, well, why? It's okay, isn't it? Well, I think it is. It's okay to say, he's having a difficult day today. Why can't he just have a duvet day? Okay? And it works for him, and they sit with him on the sofa with the duvet, and he watches DVDs. Okay? And what's interesting, they've reported back that since they've been doing that, previously, if he had a meltdown day, so a difficult day, it would take him 3 or 4 days to get over it. So a whole week lost, really, if it happens on a Monday. But they've said if they give him a duvet day, the next day he's ready to go. Okay? So it takes him 1 day rather than 4. Okay, so it's about being flexible. Watching for indicators. You need people that know your children and young people well to be working with them, to pick up those signals and to know when things are going to happen. Okay, and then really importantly is giving them a way out. Okay, we too often push these children and young people into a corner, and they have no way out except to explode. So. An example, and I'm not saying where it was because I don't think it was good practice. So I have to be very careful about how I say this, but it's important, I think, to share it with you. So I was in a school, and a young man with charge was interested about where I lived. Here we go. I live in Cambridge. And then he started asking me other questions, and they were good questions, and he was really interested. And his teacher was fine about that, except that it was disrupting the lesson. So she came up with the idea of how about Gail sits with you in the dining room at lunchtime, sits at your table, and you can have this conversation there. Great idea. He said, yep, that's absolutely fine. So then the lesson carried on. Got to dinner time. He'd had a whole morning of lessons, and we got to the dining room, and now we're asking for a huge change in his routine, because this person that he really doesn't know is going to come and sit at the table with him. And he just said, no. So I said, that's fine. I'll go and sit somewhere else. Not a problem. Okay, his teacher said, you all sit there, because he said he wants you to sit there. And I was, okay, fine, right. So I sat down. I shouldn't have done. I sat down, and he just had a complete meltdown. Okay, and he ended up being taken out of the dining room with an adult, had him dragged him under his arms and with the belt of his trousers. And I was devastated, and it took him the whole afternoon to get over it. He got pushed into a corner, and he had no way out. Earlier on in the day, he was in a well-regulated place, and the idea of me sitting in with him was fine. But when we got to the reality of it, I mean, how many of you do that? You're planning to go out for an evening or something, and then you get to the end of the day and you just go, oh, I really can't go out tonight. So you don't go. Yeah? But this poor man, the young man, he had no option, and he had a complete meltdown because he got pushed into a corner. So going back to my friend Jenny, residential school, Tuesday nights they go to Deaf Club. And she was really struggling with that and was having a really difficult time. She wanted to go, but was having a really difficult time when she got there. And so the school were fantastic because they take a minibus of young people to this youth club, but they booked a taxi to take just her. So when she was in the youth club, she knew that at any point, if she couldn't cope, she could just say to one of the adults, I need to go. And they would put her in the taxi and take her back to residential. Okay, and what's interesting is because she knew she had that way out, she coped better with being in youth club. Okay? So we need to give them a way out. And then rewarding positive behaviour. It's interesting, in schools, there's a lot of emphasis on the negative behaviour. By the time I'm called in to help them, it's because they're having a really difficult time. And the focus is all on the negative stuff. And I look at these children and young people and I think, when has anybody ever told them that they're doing a good job, that things are really good, that things are going really well? So we try and focus on the positives. And Tim wrote a great paper on positive behavioural support. And I think the reference is on one of his presentations. He put it on the resources list. So here's just some examples. Shanti talked briefly about social stories. Nancy and I have decided that we need to present on social stories next conference, because I think we brought them up in virtually everybody's consultation. It's just how it happened, but they are such a great tool, and I use them all the time in so many different ways. So maybe we need to do that next time, is spend a bit more time looking at social stories. So here's just some examples, okay? So this is for, these are all things that I've actually used with children and young people. So for this is someone in class, so have his photograph at the top, and smiley faces, what we want in school. So they're the school rules. These are the rules that are the same for all the children in class. So we're not singling him out. But what we know is that children and young people with charge need concrete visual support, so things that they can look at. And I think maybe they're important for a couple of reasons. One is that any spoken or signing information that's given to them is so transient, it's so quick, it's there and it's gone, and they can't refer back to it easily. And having something concrete is really good, because they can look at it for as long as they need to process that information. It's also a great self-check tool for them. And I was explaining to one family in a consultation, a little lad that I work with has his visual calendar, and it's in a tatty little folder because he's used it so much. And it happened to be on the day that I went in, his intervener was running around in a panic going, I can't find his timetable, I can't find his timetable. So, okay, right. So we had a sheet of paper and we drew it out for him so we could go through it with him at the start of the morning. Now, I thought he wasn't using his visual calendar anymore, not the folder, because he'd just sit and flap it now and again or bite it and then put it down and not worry about it. And we thought maybe he was moving on, maybe he didn't need it anymore. But that day, he asked me so many times, playtime next. After playtime, music, yeah? And he was just checking with me all the time, what's happening next, what's happening next? And I thought, okay, he really is using his timetable to self-check, because that behaviour had disappeared. Okay, so these concrete visual supports are so important for them. So this is just one, smiley faces, what we want to see in class, things that we don't want to see in class. Okay. Doing good work. Okay, so this is, I'm doing my work, I'm helping others, I'm playing with others and sharing. And those 5 stars had little bits of Velcro on them, and every time an adult saw him doing these things, he was given a star and he put it onto his reward chart. And at the bottom is a photograph of the symbol or the reward that is chosen by the child. And that's really important, that they have a choice of rewards and that those rewards change. Any consequences, any disciplining that you do should always be consistent and stay the same. So if you do this, if you engage in this behaviour, this will happen. That has to be consistent and stay the same. But rewards should change, and the child should be involved in choosing those rewards. This is a little chap I work with who likes riding up and down in the lift. So when he gets 10 smiley faces, he gets to have a ride up and down the lift, if that's what he chooses to put on there. Okay, he's got some other rewards that he can choose between as well. And I think it's important to say that when they're in a difficult situation, having a difficult time, he might get one of those smiley faces every 30 seconds. that we're seeing good behaviour. And all the adults in his class have a little pouch with these smiley faces. So anyone that sees him doing something positive, if they know he's struggling, then they can give him one and say, oh, you're doing great, you're sitting well, you're looking, well done for giving that response, well done for doing that, well done for doing this. And he gets his 10 smiley faces. If everything is going really well, he might only get a smiley face once an hour. Yeah? It's very dependent on the situation. Now, this is a very complex one, and I have to get my sheet in English because it's all in German in front of me. Have you kept these as handouts, Claudia? So if people want them, they could, maybe you can put them in a shared place on your website or something. I don't know, if people want to access them. So this was put together with the young man, okay? The important thing to say is that if you're talking about any of these behavioural things that you're doing to focus positive behaviour, you talk about them and you set them up when the child is in a good place, okay? This is not something that you do when you're in the middle of difficult behaviours, trying to set it up. You need to have it established well ahead of time. So this young man, if you won't start your work, if you walk around the room and won't join in, this is what the adults will do. Okay, they'll say your name a lot to try and focus you in. They'll remind you of the rule. They'll tell you when you're doing well. Yeah, that's so important, and we forget to do that so often. And they'll say well done to the children next to you, because that works for him. If you say, well done, Tom, he says, oh, okay, because I want that too. But then the important thing is say, yeah, and well done you, good sitting, yeah? But if you carry on doing those things, or get in other children's personal space, which is something that he does a lot, won't share, push the other children, or throw things around the room. Now, this is really detailed, isn't it? But he starts with a green card, and in the first instance, he gets an amber card. That's a warning that something's going on. And then he gets 3 warnings, 3 stop warnings, which we give to him as tokens, and they're put in front of him so that he knows that he's had that number of warnings. If after the 3rd warning it doesn't happen and we go to red, he then gets 3 more last chances, okay? And there is quite a lot of last chances, but for him, he was finding it so hard, I felt we couldn't immediately go to consequences. Okay, we had to really try and help him to get it together. So we gave him a lot of opportunities. And then if that didn't work, the first time out, he'd lose 5 minutes of playtime and he'd be out of class. And the second time, he'd lose 10 minutes of playtime and he'd go to year 1 class, which is year below him, and his younger sister was in there and he didn't want to go in that class. So it had to be a deterrent, okay? And then finally, if you carried on doing these things, if you're hurting people, he was biting and hitting people and shouting, head teacher gets involved and will call mum and dad and they will be sad, okay? That looks really detailed, doesn't it? But for this young man, it was what was right for him. And when we started it, we kept getting down to the reds and going down through 5 or 6 warnings. And there were times, about once a week, mum and dad were having to be told that this was going on. We get to the amber card, and that's enough for him. So it's, it's taken time. It's probably taken us about 3-4 months to get this set up, but it has worked for him, okay? I think another point, which actually might be in the next, it's in the next one. I just want to make a point that the resolution at the end of it is really important. Yeah, so it's really important that the child or the young person knows that it's okay. The teacher has drawn a line under it and that we've moved on. And that resolution is really important, but often doesn't happen. So the child is back in class and the teacher's been, I'm holding a grudge about you because you did this and it was, really awful and we're not moving on. So it's really important that you say to them, it's fine, good, well done. Okay, let's move on. Leave that behind us and we move forward and we move on now. And that resolution is so, so important that you don't carry it on after the behaviour has happened. So this is an example. You don't have to read all of this. It's just an example. I put lots of examples in here. I took them from different children's behaviour plans that we've put in place because I thought it would help you to have some different ideas. So initially we have the green strategies, okay? This should be the biggest part of any behaviour plan. So this should be all the things that help keep the child or the young person in a good place. Okay, and then the other box, the green behaviour, the preferred activities, I really like filling in with staff because it makes them focus on identifying what are positive behaviours, what are the things that we want to be reinforcing, what do we want to be giving stars for, what do we want to say great, well done for. Okay, because staff miss those behaviours. So that should be the most detailed part. And then on the next page, we have the early warning signs. Again, if you have those behaviours identified, it really helps staff to pick up. So I tutor at a university, and I had a student shadowing me. And I was sitting in class and I said, that child is going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boom. And she went, how did you know that? And I said, well, I saw this and this and this. And there were little behaviours that I saw that were saying to me this child wasn't coping well. You know, the jiggling was starting, the wriggling on the seat, the increased propping, all those sorts of things. The getting up and being told to sit down again were all indicators that this child was not managing. And so we wrote those down in the amber ones. So then the adults know what they should be looking out for, okay? And so what do? You make fewer demands, you redirect them, you offer help, anything to try and keep them out of that final stage. But then you've got incidents will occur, okay? We can't always stop this happening. And particularly in schools, there needs to be a really clear plan in place. And so that's where this bit would be. So what are the behaviours and what are we going to do about it? And then the blue strategies, most behaviour programmes don't include a blue strategies. But for me, that bit is the reconciliation phase. So for me, that is such an important thing that we need to be doing for them. I think we also need to think about when we withdraw children. Okay, I think there's a difference between withdrawal and seclusion. Okay, and there are human rights issues, the Human Rights Act we need to be thinking about, and I have quoted that in school reports before now about the child's rights, okay, because I don't think that they've been adhered to. So withdrawal is about assisting the child to move away from a situation that they're in. And it's about keeping them safe and about keeping other children safe. And it's about withdrawing them to a space where they're going to be able to get themselves back together again. Okay? Seclusion is about forcing a child to spend time on their own. So an example I gave to the professionals, and they all went, was we have an external moderation system called Ofsted, where schools are, the Ofsted inspectors go in and the schools are inspected to make sure that they're up to standard. And this is a school that had been outstanding, which is the very highest level that you can be at. And the inspectors went in, and what they saw about one child with a timeout room being used moved that school immediately into special measures, because this child was being removed from the classroom, put in a timeout room, so a soft padded area, which he probably needed so he wouldn't hurt himself throwing himself around. It had no windows and it had no internal handle, and he was shut in that room on his own. And that is absolutely appalling. And rightly, that school got banged into special measures, and lots of parents took their children out of that school straight away. Okay? That child might need to go to a safe space where, and if they're going to throw themselves around, it might need to be a soft area, but surely you would leave the door open and you would stand in the doorway so that the child knew that they weren't on their own. So you're giving them the space that they need, but you're there ready to pick things up and repair things and move things on. Yeah, so there's a real difference in the way that we respond. Then just to finish, I was at a conference in Denmark. We ran a charge pre-conference there, which the lovely Andrea Vanker, some of you might know, is involved with. She was going to be here, but her baby was ill, so she couldn't come, which was sad, because I wasn't bothered about seeing Andrea, but I did want to cuddle with the baby. But I'll get that another time. But the conference that we were at, somebody was talking about children and young people with charge and how they felt that they might have post-traumatic stress. And I thought, ooh, I don't really know enough about that. I'll go away and do some reading about it. And I still don't know enough about it, and I'm still reading about it. But there was this man called Peter Levine, and something that he wrote really helped me, because sometimes I get overwhelmed. I see a child in crisis, and I think, I don't know where to start with this. And, you know, I'm coming at it as a practitioner with a lot of years of experience of working with children with charge. And I'm not as emotionally involved as families are, and maybe as teachers are, who are involved with the child all the time and they're interveners. But I can find it overwhelming. And it's sort of, where to start? What do I do first? And he wrote this little bit, and it really reassured me. He said, one little piece at a time, because each piece adds to the others. It's like a teeny little island in this sea of trauma and overwhelm. And then you find another little island, and then another, and another. And then these islands come together to form a mass of stability, of presence in the here and now, even though there's storming all around. And I thought, yeah, that's what I have to do, is one little bit, and then it makes another bit, and they come together, and another bit. So when it feels overwhelming that you have this whole big thing to deal with, just one little bit at a time, and it will make a difference, and it will build up over time. So I hope you'll find that encouraging, and thank you for listening.
We still have more time. Der nächste Referent ist leider noch nicht da. No, he's not here.
The next speaker, unfortunately, hasn't made it yet. He's not here yet. He's supposed to get here at 11:15. That's what I was told just a minute ago. We'll hope he'll make it by then. But anyway, we have time for questions. Are there any questions? None at the moment? Okay, in that case, we'll have a somewhat longer coffee break and be back here at 11:15, please. And that'll be about the German law on care services. The new expert opinion is out, also how to secure the persons to be cared for, and lots of opportunity for questions. I know he's on his way, and I hope he'll make it by then. We'll see what happens. Coffee break now. Thank you.